Hello everybody, welcome to the channel. My name is Valkyrie Verder. It's Valkyrie of the Veil. That's like the more easier English translation. Today we're here to talk about astrology and magic, specifically Mercury and its retrogrades. We're going to be looking at what does it mean for a person, how do we navigate an actual Mercury retrograde. This is a part of a bigger course on retrogrades, so if you would like to see that, there is a playlist that this is attached to on YouTube, or you can sign up for the entire study course on the website. Beautiful, gorgeous. There's other courses of study on that website as well if you are interested in it. I also just started season 2 of the podcast, which I'm super excited about. So if you want to get updates on that, the blog is linked below. There are going to be weekly emails that go out with the updates. There's also going to be weekly transit updates with the moon cycle so that we know what's going on and how to navigate our moons. It's going to be pretty good. So that is like my newest update. I don't want to bore you with anything else because I feel like all the other updates are old. My books are closed currently. That's kind of the only other big major one. So that's what's up. Let's talk about Mercury retrograde. So I have notes because you know what? Needed, necessary. Let's talk about more of the specifics, logistics of Mercury retrograde. There are several of them a year, okay? There's like 3 to 4 a year. The sun and the Mercury, they like to do this little dance in the sky where the sun just moves in a circle. It doesn't ever retrograde. It just moves in a circle and it moves in a circle. And for those of you that don't know, also retrograde is when a planet appears to be moving backwards in the sky. So it's not actually moving backwards. It just looks like it's moving backwards because of our perspective here on Earth. And what happens with the sun and Mercury is that we just have the sun that goes throughout the sky and it goes throughout like the wheel of the chart, the astrological wheel. It just goes in a circle. Just goes on its merry little way. It just goes in a circle. But then Mercury, it reminds me of a dog, kind of, in the sense that it'll like go past the sun and it'll be like, zoom. And then it'll realize it got too far and it'll come back and it'll be like, zoom. And then it'll realize it got too far in its retrograde and then it'll turn it back around and it'll go zoom. It basically does that every year. Mercury is the planet of communication, of messages, of carrying messages, of systems of communication, dependent upon where Mercury is during its transit of the retrograde and also where Mercury is in your chart. Then our retrogrades are going to affect you differently because everything in astrology is really personal. But if you're looking at like the large scale stuff, then just look at say that there's a Mercury in Capricorn retrograde, okay? And where's Capricorn in your chart? Do you have any Capricorn placements? Those are probably going to be heavily affected. So that's one way to look at the effects of how it could come into your life and affect you for sure. They last about 3 weeks. There's 3 to 4 a year. They also have 2-week shadow periods on the front end and the back end. And working with these shadow periods is one of my new favorite things to do as I've been studying astrological transits. I don't do it all the time, especially like our most previous one was like right before eclipse season, and there's a lot of other stuff going on astrologically, and I just honestly forgot that there was a shadow period going on. But normally I do like to pay attention to it because if you can start to pay attention to your communication, your systems of communication, especially the placements that Mercury is going to affect the most are going to be Gemini, Virgo, and then your 3rd house and your 6th house. So especially if you have placements that are in the 3rd house and the 6th house, or you have a lot of Gemini or you have a lot of Virgo in your chart, then that, especially if Mercury is in a 3rd or a 6th house, by goodness, Mercury retrogrades are going to be like super, super, super directed at you. So just a heads up. Or if you have like a Gemini or a Virgo, like any of the big 3 signs, the sun, moon, rising, that are Gemini, Virgo, or in the 3rd or the 6th house, like anything prominent of that in your chart, Mercury retrograde, you're going to feel it more than maybe other people do. And your work is going to be a little bit more involved with it. I have a Mercury in the 6th house, so like, I get it. So this is how I navigate those shadow periods. Normally the shadow period that starts 2 weeks before, so like the pre-shadow period, that will let you know like, what is it that I need to pay attention to? Oh, there's that weird thing. When I was taking on client bookings, it normally had to do with that for me, or like that system or setup. just because of how my placements are in my chart and how I interact with them. And this is literally like my life's work. So it's involved. But having that, like, just kind of like awareness of this is the area where this is kind of not going well, or this is the area where things are, this is a little weird. This is out of touch. Maybe this person didn't understand me. Maybe there's another person that I didn't understand. So having that just kind of like, what is it that you're dealing with before? That shadow period is going to let you know, like, it might not affect you directly, but just have your eye open to it. Got it. Understood. And then when the retrograde is actually happening, if there's any like issues or problems or anything that you need to see that has to do with those Mercury spaces and placements that are both astrologically in our transits and also in your chart and how those interact, if there's anything you need to see, then that Mercury retrograde will let you know. It will let you know. And then the post shadow period, usually I use that to resolve anything that happened within those 3 to 4 weeks and in the 2-week pre-shadow period, because most people, how do I say this? Like, I've seen what happens in my life. Let me not talk about other people. Let me talk about myself. You know what? True. I've seen what happens in my life if I don't wrap it up and like wrap up the shadow period, and then it just lingers and it becomes a problem later. So if you can look at what happened during that Mercury retrograde and use that post shadow period to correct anything or redirect anything, like that's really important to do. In my opinion, that's true. Characteristics of people who have a Mercury retrograde in your chart, you may have to like over communicate, or people might misunderstand you, or you might just have communication issues, whether you're misunderstood or other people are misunderstanding you, like either on purpose or not on purpose. It'll depend on your placements. For example, say like a Mercury in Scorpio or Mercury in Capricorn, because of the power placements of those, people might misunderstand you on purpose. It is what it is. But generally speaking, people who have a Mercury retrograde, they're going to probably have to go over communication stuff more than once. So like reading things more than once, making sure that if you're signing contracts, you're reading those more than once. It could be that you send emails and they get lost to spam folders more often than other people. Just like little tiny things like that don't seem that little because it's like a part of your whole entire life. Things like that could become an issue. However, if you have a Mercury retrograde, so that's kind of the downside of it, is like there does need to be a little bit more communication to get to the point, or people might not take you seriously with your words. On the upside of it, you are able to collect more words from other people. Could be an upside. Maybe it's not an upside, but if it's a part of your work to collect words from other people, then you have the opportunity to do that and to create more space for words. Or if you're like a space holder sort of person and you need to be able to create space for other people to talk, like a therapist or something like that, that Mercury retrograde will allow there to be more room. It'll take up more space, more room for words. Mercury retrogrades, one thing about retrogrades is they also connect us more to the ancestors. If you think about a birth chart, it's a snapshot of what's happening when we're born and what happens before we're born. If a retrograde happens during the birth, in that birth chart, what happens before we're born? That's our ancestral magic. That's like where we come from. Because of the swiftness of Mercury and its retrograde, then like other planets, we're gonna go like several generations back in the work. Mercury retrograde is going to be in a chart, is going to be very, very fixated on basically just like the language structure of our parents. And what does that look like? Corrections of it, redirections of it. Basically, people who have Mercury retrogrades in their chart are kind of tasked with talking differently and creating new systems than the parents, and that can look like many different things. Maybe you're someone who comes from a bilingual family and you are the translator. It could look like you are like a first generation reader and writer. That could be a part of it. That Mercury retrograde is also going to, if there's any like harmful narratives that are sitting within those parental spaces, Mercury retrogrades is going to ask that you kind of revisit them and reconsider them. Retrogrades are a space of reconsideration. And one of the things that I love about retrogrades when it comes to doing ancestral work is that if you return and do the work where that retrograde is, it's not going to be anything that is passed on. The retrograde within a sign or a planet, a placement, it allows you to like wrap the whole thing up for you and everybody else who would come after you, whereas people who have a direct planet might not necessarily be able to make that change for every single person who comes after them, and it would just be more of, or like before them too, and just be more about themselves. So that's one thing to look out for when it comes to Mercury retrogrades. You're automatically going to be more connected to the ancestral words and ancestral tongue when it comes to having an actual Mercury retrograde out here too. So if you're someone who does ancestral offerings and ancestral work, something to pay attention to is that there could be more communication from the ancestors. And then on a big general note, Mercury retrograde is a time when we're harvesting our words. What were you talking about for the previous like 3 to 4 months? Were you talking about good stuff? Were you talking about your plans? Were you planting seeds with your words? How were you doing that? And why were you doing that? When were you doing that? And how many seeds did you plant? Because retrogrades, one of the things that they ensure is that they will always be a time of harvest. So if you were speaking, this is why on like, how do I say? There's a lot of people who experience like exes come back during Mercury retrogrades. There's a reason for that, is because maybe you were talking about that ex, maybe you're hoping that they would return to you and continue to speak on it. So if you find yourself like having those moments where you're like, during a Mercury retrograde, it's like, why am I harvesting this? Where is this coming from? If you're able to track it back, could be 3 or 4 months ago, could be a year ago. There's like, it depends on what sign the Mercury's in at the time and like the other transits that are going on. Each Mercury retrograde is going to be a little bit different, but good rule of thumb is like just go back to the most previous Mercury retrograde and everything that's happened there. You're going to have to reap what you were talking about. Like you're going to have to eat your own words as a Mercury retrograde. So be kind with them and it makes it a little bit easier. Yeah. So that's about Mercury retrograde. That's what's up. That's how to navigate it. That's how I work with them. And that's a little bit about their characteristics in the chart. So thanks for being here. Gratitude, reverence, and love to you. If you would like to receive more information on astrology and magic, join the page, subscribe. I'll be here, that's what it is. So I will see you next time. Keep doing what you need to do. Keep up your brew. Gratitude, reverence, and love to the spirits that are true and love, truth, and free. Gratitude, reverence, and love to you again. That's true. And gratitude, reverence, and love to the spirits that are free. Thank you for being here and allowing us to be free. And that's it. I'll leave it be. And I'll talk to you soon.